Todd Duffee, 7 seconds to glory, years of agony. 7 seconds. That's all it took for Todd Duffee to announce himself as the future of the heavyweight division with one of the fastest knockouts in UFC history. One punch. Tim Hague unconscious on the canvas. The MMA world had just witnessed the arrival of a terrifying new force. Duffee had everything. Explosive speed for a heavyweight, devastating knockout power, and the kind of athletic ability that made veterans nervous. This was supposed to be the beginning of a dominant championship run. But what came next wasn't glory. It was a neurological disorder that would steal everything from him. And he's not alone. In 2013, everything changed. Duffee was diagnosed with Parsonage-Turner syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that causes severe pain, weakness, and numbness in the arms and shoulders. For a professional fighter, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was career-ending. The disorder made it nearly impossible for him to train consistently. Every punch he threw came with uncertainty. The explosiveness that defined him started to fade. The surgeries piled up. Shoulder repairs, knee reconstructions, extended rehabilitation periods that kept him out of competition for years at a time. When he finally returned to face Frank Mir in 2015, the damage was evident. Mir knocked him out in the first round. The timing was off, the reflexes weren't there. The mental confidence had cracked under the weight of so much instability. Todd Duffee's tragedy isn't just about injuries. It's about a neurological disorder systematically dismantling one of the most physically gifted heavyweights the sport had ever seen. What could have been a decade of dominance became a story of what might have been, all because his own nervous system turned against him. Tatiana Suarez, the future champion who never was. Tatiana Suarez entered the UFC with a perfect 8-0 record, an elite wrestling pedigree, and the kind of dominance that made analysts unanimous. She was going to be champion. Not maybe, not potentially, she was the future of the women's strawweight division. Every fight was a masterclass in control, pressure, and inevitability. Opponents couldn't breathe when she was on top of them. Title shot discussions started almost immediately. Then, the injuries began. Neck issues that turned into spinal disc problems, training sessions cut short, fights canceled. The damage compounded with every attempt to return, significant knee trauma requiring surgery, ligament repairs that demanded months of rehabilitation. Each comeback attempt was met with another setback, another injury, another year lost. The cruelest part? Suarez wasn't just sidelined for months, she lost years, plural. Multiple year stretches where she couldn't compete, couldn't train, couldn't do the things she'd spent her entire life preparing for. By the time she was physically able to return, the division had evolved. New contenders had emerged. Her window had narrowed. When she finally got her title shot against Zhang Weili, the wear was visible. Reduced output, fewer successful takedowns. The grappling exchanges that once seemed effortless now showed strain. Her body had betrayed her at every critical moment. Tatiana Suarez had more technical polish, more fight IQ, more mental toughness than most of her peers, but none of that mattered when her spine and knees refused to cooperate. The future champion never got her moment, robbed not by opponents, but by the fragility of her own body. Ronda Rousey, the champion who fell from orbit. Ronda Rousey didn't just dominate the UFC, she transcended it. She was a global superstar, an undefeated force of nature who finished opponents with arm bars so efficiently it became her signature. She had mainstream appeal, movie deals, and an aura of invincibility. Rousey wasn't just winning, she was rewriting what was possible for women in combat sports. Then came November 15, 2015. UFC 193, Holly Holm. What happened that night wasn't just a loss, it was an exposure. Holm systematically dismantled Rousey's striking, kept her at range, and then delivered a head kick that knocked her unconscious in front of 56,000 people. The world saw it, the aura shattered. The vulnerabilities, her head movement, her boxing defense, her inability to adapt mid-fight were laid bare. The psychological damage was catastrophic. Rousey later admitted she contemplated suicide after the loss. When she returned over a year later to face Amanda Nunes at UFC 207, the damage was still there. She was knocked out in 48 seconds. She didn't land a single significant strike. Her confidence was gone. Her reflexes hesitated. The fighter who once walked through opponents now couldn't survive a minute. Ronda Rousey never competed in MMA again. Her entire legacy pivoted on 2 consecutive losses. Not a gradual decline, not aging out of her prime, but a sudden, irreversible fall from dominance to departure. She went from pound-for-pound great to retired in the span of 13 months. The tragedy of Rousey's career is that she didn't fade. She fell from orbit, and when she hit the ground, there was no getting back up. Sage Northcutt, the overhyped prodigy. Sage Northcutt looked like he was designed in a laboratory to be an MMA star. Movie star looks, ridiculous athleticism, flashy techniques, and the kind of marketability that made UFC executives salivate. He was called the next big thing before he'd earned it. The hype machine was in full effect. But hype doesn't win fights. Depth of skill does. And Northcutt's game had holes. His grappling defense wasn't sharp. His durability was questionable. Against seasoned, well-rounded fighters, those gaps became canyons. The knockouts came, the confidence wavered. The injuries accumulated, both physical and psychological. The real tragedy here is timing. Northcutt was pushed into high-level competition before he was ready. He needed years of development, time to shore up his wrestling defense, time to build the kind of durability required at the elite level. Instead, he was thrown to the wolves because he looked the part. His performances became inconsistent. The losses stacked up. The narrative shifted from rising star to cautionary tale. Sage Northcutt's story is tragic because of the disconnect between potential and preparation. He had immense promise, incredible physical gifts, and undeniable charisma. But the structural gaps in his game were exposed too early, too brutally, and by the time he could have addressed them, the damage to his career trajectory was already done. Mark Kerr, the Titan. Consumed by demons. Mark Kerr was an absolute monster in the early days of MMA, a physically dominant heavyweight who steamrolled through opponents in tournament-style competition. He had the size, the strength, the grappling ability to control and finish anyone. In a different timeline, Mark Kerr is remembered as one of the all-time great heavyweights. But Kerr's demons were as powerful as his physicality. Substance abuse ravaged him. Mental health struggles went unaddressed. The discipline required to sustain elite-level performance crumbled under the weight of his personal chaos. His training became inconsistent. His focus scattered. The dominance that once seemed inevitable faded into mediocrity. His later fights are hard to watch. A fighter who looks like he's already lost before the bell rings, unable to summon the energy or aggression that defined his early career. The control and power that made him feared was replaced by hesitation and decline. Losses mounted. Performances deteriorated. The legend became a cautionary tale. Mark Kerr's tragedy is internal. It's not about injuries or bad matchmaking. It's about a man whose greatness was consumed by the instability of his own mind. He should have been an enduring legend, a name spoken with reverence. Instead, his career is a reminder that talent and power mean nothing if you can't stabilize the chaos outside the cage. Kevin Lee, the lightning that burned out. Kevin Lee had every tool you could want in a lightweight contender: elite wrestling, improving striking, explosive athleticism, and the confidence to challenge anyone. When he fought Tony Ferguson for the interim title, people saw a future champion. He had the physical gifts, he had the youth. He just needed time and consistency to refine everything. But consistency never came. Knee injuries, including torn ACLs, stripped away his explosiveness and lateral movement, the very attributes that made his wrestling so dangerous. His body stopped responding the way it used to. The weight cuts became brutal, weakening him further and compounding injury risk with every fight camp. The decline showed up in his performances: slower reactions, defensive lapses, cardio issues. The knockouts and submissions he suffered reflected a fighter whose body was breaking down faster than his career could recover. Eventually, Lee announced his retirement, worn down by accumulated damage and diminishing returns. Kevin Lee's tragedy is one of unfulfilled potential. Many believed he was 2 to 3 years away from a dominant lightweight title run. Instead, injuries overtook him. His body betrayed him, and the career trajectory that pointed upward curved sharply downward before he ever reached his peak. TJ Grant, the champion erased by concussions. TJ Grant did something most fighters never accomplish. He earned a UFC lightweight title shot by knocking out Benson Henderson, one of the division's elite. He was on top of the world. The championship was within reach. This was his moment. Then came the concussions, brain trauma, medical suspensions, neurological damage that wouldn't heal. Grant was pulled from fight after fight, unable to clear doctors, unable to defend the title shot he'd earned. His cognitive recovery never came. The mobility, timing, and sharpness that carried him to the brink of gold disappeared under the weight of traumatic brain injury. Comeback attempts went nowhere. He wasn't the same fighter. The rhythm was gone. The confidence was shattered. The brain simply couldn't recover enough to allow him to compete at the level required. TJ Grant's tragedy is acute and painful. He earned the top prize. He was one fight away from championship glory, but his brain couldn't survive the journey there. His name is a footnote in lightweight history, a reminder of what was stolen not by an opponent, but by the cumulative damage that comes with fighting for a living. Johny Hendricks, the slow, agonizing fade. Johny Hendricks was a force at welterweight. Knockout power in both hands, elite wrestling credentials, and competitive wars with the division's best. His title win over Robbie Lawler was iconic, a brutal, hard-fought victory that seemed to announce a new era of dominance. But the decline didn't come suddenly. It eroded him slowly, piece by piece. He started missing weight. His cardio faded. His movement became sluggish. The explosive output that defined his peak years disappeared, replaced by slower, more tentative performances. Many point to the brutal weight cuts as the culprit. Cutting to 170 pounds became unsustainable, weakening his body and draining his energy before fights even started. He lost closely contested fights he might have won in his prime. Each loss chipped away at his psychological armor. Doubt crept in. His final UFC years were marked by uncertainty about when he'd fight, how his body would respond, whether he could still compete at the top level. The answer became increasingly clear. He couldn't. Johny Hendricks' tragedy isn't dramatic. It's the slow unraveling of a once elite fighter. There was no clean exit, no defining final moment. Just a gradual fading of the attributes that made him great until there was nothing left but the memory of what used to be. Tony Ferguson, El Cucuy's heartbreaking descent. Tony Ferguson's 12-fight win streak is the stuff of legend. Spinning elbows from nowhere, relentless pressure, unconventional angles and submissions that defied logic. He was one of the most terrifying lightweights in UFC history, and for years he seemed unstoppable. Then the injuries came. The wear accumulated. His reflexes, once razor-sharp, began to slow. His speech patterns changed. His durability, the legendary Ferguson chin, started to crack. Analysts pointed to cumulative brain trauma, years of brutal training camps, and the inevitable toll of aging in one of the sport's most violent divisions. What followed was unprecedented. 7 consecutive losses. 7! For a fighter of Ferguson's caliber, that streak is historically rare. His decline wasn't gradual, it was a cliff. The once impenetrable defense gave way. Hesitation replaced aggression. Opponents exploited openings that younger Ferguson would have closed instantly. The tragedy of Tony Ferguson is twofold. His legacy as a warrior is cemented. No one questions his heart or his contributions to the sport. But his final years are a brutal reminder of what happens when a fighter's body and brain can no longer sustain the punishment. Watching El Cucuy decline from mythical status to desperation fights is one of the most painful arcs in modern MMA. Melvin Guillard, the flash that never became lightning. Melvin Guillard was explosive. Highlight reel knockouts, incredible speed, fan-favorite finishes. Everything about his early UFC run screamed potential. He lit up the Octagon and made you believe something special was about to happen. But potential alone doesn't build legacies. Consistency does. And Guillard never found it. Weight management issues derailed camps. Training inconsistencies led to exploitable gaps. Against more well-rounded opponents, his cardio, grappling, and adaptability were exposed. The knockouts slowed. The losses accumulated. Over time, his fights shifted from dominance to survival. His later performances lacked the explosiveness that defined him. The losses weren't spectacular, they were grinding, methodical defeats by fighters who simply had more complete games. Melvin Guillard's tragedy is quiet. It's not a dramatic fall or a devastating injury. It's the story of what never materialized, an extended prime that never came, title contention that never arrived, a legacy performance that never happened. His career ended not with a bang, but with a gradual fading into obscurity, remembered more for what could have been than what was. Brandon Thatch, the rise killed by injury. Brandon Thatch had the hype, a big, rangy striker with knockout power and the kind of reach that made opponents uncomfortable from the opening bell. He looked like the next big thing at welterweight. Excitement surrounded his name. Then the injuries hit. Serious shoulder damage requiring surgery, ankle injuries that demanded lengthy rehab. Just as he was preparing to return, he suffered a compound toe fracture, one of those injuries that doesn't just hurt, it psychologically breaks you. Every comeback felt like starting from scratch. The rhythm disappeared, the timing evaporated. The psychological confidence that came from consistent training and competition was replaced by hesitation and doubt. Losses began to stack. The fire that once burned bright dimmed under the weight of setbacks. Brandon Thatch's story of momentum killed by injury. He never transitioned from hype to sustained performance because his body wouldn't allow it. His name survives mostly in the memory of hardcore fans who remember what he could have been rather than what he achieved. Renan Barão, the fall from Invincibility. Renan Barão was untouchable. A 32-fight unbeaten streak, pound-for-pound rankings, dominant title defenses. He wasn't just winning, he was dismantling opponents with surgical precision. He looked unbeatable. Then came TJ Dillashaw at UFC 173. The fight was shocking. Dillashaw broke Barão's rhythm, knocked him down repeatedly, and eventually finished him. The aura of invincibility shattered in a single night. The world saw that Barão could be hurt, could be beaten, could be broken. But the real destruction came from the weight cuts. In 2014, Barão fainted during a weight cut and had to withdraw from a title fight for safety reasons. He later admitted the cuts were destroying him. His body couldn't recover. The toll was catastrophic. His performance dropped off a cliff. Losses piled up. Decision defeats became common. His output slowed. His defense deteriorated. The fighter who once seemed invincible became a competitive liability. Every fight showed a diminished version of the champion he used to be. Renan's tragedy is steep and brutal. From top-tier pound-for-pound status to barely competitive in the span of a few years. His reversal is one of the most dramatic in UFC history, and he stands as a prime example of how the demands of weight cutting and psychological fallout from a shattered aura can completely break a champion. If you found this video informative, hit that like button and subscribe to MMA Whiteboard for more deep dives into the stories that shape the sport. And drop a comment below. Which fighter's story hit you the hardest? And who else do you think deserves to be covered in a future video? Thanks for watching.